This is the 5-Minute Writing Corner with Troy Bernardo. When people ask you, hey, what's your story about? How will you answer them? Are you going to answer it philosophically? Because there's a lot of different ways you could potentially answer it, right? You could answer it by saying, thematically, you have a romance novel and it's about love and loss. That's one way. You could also answer it by some sort of long-winded explanation on the protagonist and how they grow throughout the film. You could also potentially even just say nothing, which I've heard before, which I need to stress is not true. Every story is about something. Anyone who's workshopped a story, a novel, a film is going to know answers are all over the place. And I want to stress here, by the way, all of these questions are really important. Theme is extremely important. Characterization, extremely important. To the point that they're sometimes huge driving forces behind stories. But today, I want to answer the plot of a story and why that's important, right? Understanding what we're supposed to be doing in our stories, how we're hardwired for stories, thinking about conflict in our stories really helps ease this process of story creation. So let's start out with a simple question that I ask my students sometimes is how many different types of plot structures or stories do you think are really out there, right? If we had to say how many stories exist, types of stories exist, what would you say? 10, 30, 100, 1,000? The number might actually be a little bit surprising because as you can tell, this video isn't hours long. It's only a few minutes, so there can't be that many, right? Really, there's only 7 basic plots or stories we can truly pick from. Full disclosure, I used AI for the first time to make this video, and this was the image that comes up. I don't know why. Because the only thing I wrote in was, of course, there are combinations, and not every single one is a standalone genre. But I have no idea why this wild image came up, but I kept it in because it's so nuts. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So now let's go ahead and dive in and come up with examples of each type of story that are popular today. If you're interested in examining this more, you can read 7 basic plots. I'll put the link in the description below, so it'll be easy to find. Worth a read, for sure. Our first type of story is called Overcoming the Monster, and that's where our main character sets out to defeat some sort of beast threatening the main character, their land, their family, or their farm, right? Honestly, if you can consider any kind of Marvel movie, right, where it's a man versus man or a person versus person scenario fighting a monster. Second's Rags to Riches, Riches to Rags. That's where our main character or the family of the main character loses everything or kind of gets everything. Sometimes at the end of the story they get it all back again or they lose it all again. It kind of depends on the type of story you're seeing. My favorite example is Schitt's Creek. That's where a wealthy family loses everything and has to adjust to a new situation, leaving New York for rural, I forgot where. Doesn't really matter. Generally, this is kind of like a fish out of water story, right? We're seeing someone in a new scenario. Adam Sandler's Mr. Deeds is another great example. Our third story is Voyage and Return, and that's where someone leaves, where they go on a venture out into new land. This is often confused with quest. However, the focus here isn't necessarily one object like in a quest, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but the experience the protagonist kind of gets to grow and learn through that experience. There's a ton of popular ones of this story. It literally, like any hero's journey, the Odyssey, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gulliver's Travels, right? They're going out and learning something. This one's pretty straightforward. Comedy, light, funny. The protagonist generally wins. I don't think we really have to dive too much into this, but, Anchorman, a darker version might be The Big Lebowski, my favorite film, or one of my favorite films. Tragedies where the main character has a huge tragic flaw in them that ultimately leads to loss. Pretty straightforward. Romeo and Juliet's probably the most famous example. Leaving Las Vegas is my personal favorite tragedy where we have a sex worker and an alcoholic. Great story. Rebirth, this is where we see a protagonist go through something significant, changes their character perspective, usually for the better, as far as I know. Examples of this are, of course, going to be Groundhog Day, great example, combination of comedy of that, and Pride and Prejudice, another wonderful example. Next, we have Quest. That's where the protagonist or a group of protagonists go out and try and get something of importance, whether physical or otherwise. Tons of examples with this one, right? We have Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail. Hilarious. Lord of the Rings, another straightforward example. Now, remember, and this is important, even though stories have the same plot structure, they can be vastly different, right? Let's take a look at our rebirth category. So we have two completely different films and stories with Groundhog Day and the literary classic Pride and Prejudice. Even though they're in the same category, right? Outside of them having the plot structure that's the same, where the protagonist is struggling to overcome something, in Pride and Prejudice, or Pride and Prejudice of Mr. Darcy, and obviously in Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray's waking up every single day, reliving the same day, there's not a lot in common, right? And people often get mad when they hear about the rigidity of these structures. They think their creativity is being stifled now, right? That their story can't fit into these boxes that are being created. You know, their genius and their creativity is being stifled. And I want to implore you not to think that way, right? Think of the countless stories you love, right? And they can be as films, books, stories your parents would read to you when you went to sleep as a child. These stories all fit into these categories because we're hardwired for these types of stories. And really, I think it kind of takes some of the pressure off, right? Does the fact that Pulp Fiction, fits into a category like Rebirth take anything away from it being done creatively and in such an engaging way? Does the movie feel less fun or entrancing? Of course not. It's a great film no matter what. So it's important to remember and think about this when you're considering how your story fits into these bigger ideas, right? That way you have a basic track of where to go. We are hardwired for the story, especially these types of stories. We look for fresh takes on old tropes. That's what we like. Haven't you ever heard someone say, I love that series until the last season, or the book just fell apart at the end? It's because they didn't think about what kind of story they were telling and didn't align with the appropriate plot. I genuinely believe that. Now I want to stress, this is not the end-all be-all of storytelling, right? There are tons of other things you need outside of these simple plot points to consider. Characters, good motivation, a MacGuffin, if you're writing, right? And then you need all those things if you're making a movie, plus quality shots, actors, lighting, so much more. But knowing how to use the already engaging archetypes to help map out a story is a wonderful place to start for you, and for anybody. One of my favorite writing teachers told me the story of girl meets boy and falls in love has been told 1,000,000 times. And it has. Truly. Your job is to make it fresh and new. And never forget that's what we're supposed to do. Okay, so what now? Why is this important and how can we use it? So the most important thing you want to do really is try and identify what type of story you're writing. Does it need to be 100%? Of course not. Right? But if I ask you, hey, which of these archetypal stories does your story fit into, and you can't answer it, you might want to consider retooling your story to make it make sense in some way so it fits into one of these narratives. So the bigger question of why this is important. Just remember that audiences are looking for stories. Stories that they understand and stories that they know. And as long as they fit into these type of archetypal structures and plot points, they're going to be more engaged and realistically more interested in what you're writing or what you're creating. Now, once again, some people find this very stifling. Third and most importantly, don't be discouraged by this information. So many young writers and so many of my students get upset when they hear about these different types of ways to structure their stories because they feel like they're confined. They feel like this is stifling their creativity. Just remember that this is going to help people engage with your story faster and understand what they're reading at a much quicker pace. So don't be discouraged. Use it as a tool, just like any other writing tool. Once again, I went over the 5 minutes, and I apologize for that, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I've been so happy with the messages I've been getting and the comments. It's been wonderful. If you want me to focus on something, I have a few videos coming up, some ideas to do, but I'm always open to kind of researching and looking into new things and talking about new ideas when it comes to writing. So feel free to put something in the comments if you'd like me to make a video on it. In addition to that, once again, thank you so much for watching. I'm a teacher, so this summer I'm going to be doing, or at least trying to do a lot more videos. So we'll see how it goes. Thank you.